Today we're going to be doing a day in the life review of the iPhone 14 in 2024, discussing and evaluating the device, and talking about why I actually don't recommend buying this iPhone right now, despite it being a great device.
And I just want to take a moment and thank Fazebo for sponsoring this video. Fazebo's Alta Desk will help take your home office to the next level. Made with quality materials, this adjustable standing desk will keep you comfortable and productive throughout your workday. It's available in 4 colors, including rustic brown, light rustic, black, and white. It features an easy-to-use controller to raise or lower the desk, in addition to 2 presets for standing height and sitting height. You can either get the Alta Desk in a 60 by 30 inch size, or a larger 72 by 30 inch size, which is what I'm rocking here. And this larger size is perfect for me, as my workflow requires a lot of space, as I'm usually reviewing and working with multiple devices at once, and I also need space for packages, accessories, hard drives, filming equipment, and much more. Being able to effortlessly switch between working in a seated position to working in a standing position helps keep me engaged, focused, and quite comfortable throughout the workday. If you're interested in the Fazebo Alta Desk, I'll leave a link to the product in the video description. Big thanks again to Fazebo for sponsoring this video.
But alright, first stop of the day, as per the usual, is grabbing some lunch, so let's get out of here.
And with lunch on the way, let's go over some general information about the iPhone 14. This phone was released in late 2022, and it's currently the previous one generation old iPhone right now. It features a 6.1-inch OLED display with the classic aluminum sides and back glass design. It features the same overall design that the newest iPhone 15 has, and features an almost identical design to the one generation older iPhone 13. So the latest 3 generations of the iPhone all share the same aesthetic. This phone is powered by the Apple A15 chip, which is Apple's third to latest generation iPhone processor, and it has plenty of power and longevity for anybody. It's a very powerful chipset. As I often say, as of late, Apple Silicon processors have gotten to a point over the last 4 or so years where you won't notice any substantial drop in performance when using a device with a processor that's 1 to 2 years old, as these modern A-series chipsets from the last few years have quite a lot of headroom and longevity. The iPhone 14 has a 3,279 milliamp hour battery, which delivers great battery life. This phone has a reputation for having very solid battery performance. The latest generation iPhone 15 only has a slightly larger battery capacity of 3,349 milliamp hours, and the one generation older iPhone 13 only has a slightly smaller battery capacity of 3,227 milliamp hours. Of course, there's a lot more factors that go into determining battery performance than just the battery capacity, but the iPhone 15, 14, and 13 are all known for having a great battery life, so that shouldn't be a concern with any of these devices. The iPhone 14 has a max brightness of 800 nits, and it can go all the way up to 1200 nits when watching HDR content specifically. And this display is going to be plenty bright for the average person, and the iPhone 14 features 2 rear-facing cameras, being a 12 megapixel main lens and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens. Here's a 1x photo taken on the iPhone 13, 14, and 15 compared side by side. And alright, time to go grab some coffee and knock some work out. But first, let's take some more photos and videos on these phones and compare them. So as you're seeing right now, photos and videos taken on all 3 of these iPhones look great. So for the average person that just wants to take photos that overall look pretty good, you can't go wrong with any of these iPhones. Now, the very latest iPhone 15 does feature a new 48 megapixel main lens, where the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 feature a 12 megapixel main lens. And this new 48 megapixel lens now allows the latest iPhone 15 to take 24 megapixel shots instead of the 12 megapixel shots the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 take, resulting in photos taken on the iPhone 15 having noticeably better quality and detail, which you'll mostly notice when zooming in on a photo you've taken. And as much as it is a noticeable improvement, 99% of people will be completely satisfied with the photos and videos taken on the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13. And in terms of camera differences between the iPhone 14 and the previous generation iPhone 13, the iPhone 14 does feature a larger main camera lens in addition to some additional image processing techniques, which result in the iPhone 14 here having slightly better camera performance and some additional camera options than the one generation older iPhone 13, But having compared these two cameras side by side to each other, the difference for average day-to-day photo and video taking is honestly unnoticeable most of the time. And in addition to having the typical 0.5 times and 1 times optical zoom levels, the latest iPhone 15 now has an additional optical 2 times zoom level as well, as a result of that new 48 megapixel main camera lens. Now, of course, the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 can take digital 2 times zoom photos that look very good, but they aren't going to have quite the same quality and detail as the newest iPhone 15 with the optical 2 times zoom. And the absolute max digital zoom for photos on the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 is 5 times, while the max digital zoom for photos on the iPhone 15 is 10 times. And here's a photo taken with the front-facing camera on all these iPhones. It's looking sharp on all of them. And here's some video footage shot on all 3 of these iPhones compared side by side, all shot at 4K 60 frames per second. And in terms of video, I don't notice any substantial difference between the quality of any of these 3 iPhones here. They all look very sharp. Even the digital, non-optical 2 times video on the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 look quite good, even compared to the optical 2 times zoom on the latest iPhone 15. And in terms of the max digital zoom level for video on the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13, it's going to be 3 times. And on the iPhone 15, it's going to be 5 times. And also, here's some 4K 60 frames per second video shot with the front-facing camera as well. It looks quite good on all of them, so no worries about FaceTime or zoom quality on any of these phones. But anyways, we're now heading over to the coffee shop to get some work done. So I want to talk a little more about the iPhone 14 and how it compares to the other iPhones Apple is currently selling. So as I mentioned earlier, this phone was released in late 2022, and it's the previous generation iPhone at the moment. It shares a very similar design to the newest iPhone 15, and it's pretty much the exact same design as the one generation older iPhone 13. The very latest generation iPhone 15 does feature a new frosted back glass texture, more rounded edges that make the phone feel softer in the hand. The iPhone 15 is now transitioned to USB-C as well, as opposed to the proprietary Lightning port on the iPhone 14 and earlier. This is, of course, much more than just a design change, as this offers significant convenience. And the new dynamic island pill-shaped cutout at the top of the screen that allows for a few neat software features. But fundamentally, the latest 3 generations of the iPhone, being the 13, 14, and 15, again, feature the overall same design. And as much as the iPhone 14 is a great iPhone, I actually don't recommend buying it right now. And this is because the one generation older iPhone 13 offers almost the exact same experience in terms of both specs and capability and design. And it's $100 cheaper than the iPhone 14. So the iPhone 13 is powered by the same A15 processor as the iPhone 14 here. It features the same design with the aluminum sides and glass back, the same 6.1-inch OLED display, the same Lightning port, etc. It's a very minor update. In terms of the differences between the iPhone 14 and iPhone 13, the A15 processor in the iPhone 14 features 1 additional GPU core than the A15 processor in the iPhone 13, but this is something you'll likely never notice in actual real-life usage. The iPhone 14 features emergency SOS via satellite and crash detection, where the iPhone 13 doesn't. These are 2 fantastic emergency-related features, but probably aren't worth getting the 14 over the 13 just for those, obviously depending on your lifestyle. Also, as I mentioned before, the iPhone 14's main camera lens is slightly larger than the iPhone 13's main camera lens, and the iPhone 14 features some additional image processing techniques that the iPhone 13 doesn't have. This results in the iPhone 14 having a little bit better camera quality than the iPhone 13, and the iPhone 14 having a few new camera features that the iPhone 13 doesn't have. But as you saw with the camera footage earlier, it's generally not noticeable in most scenarios. Now, honestly, one of the more notable changes the iPhone 14 brings to the table is the fact that it has 6 gigabytes of RAM, where the iPhone 13 has 4 gigabytes of RAM. This is going to come in handy when you're switching between a lot of applications quickly, doing a lot of different things in each app. Also, for example, when you have a lot of Safari tabs open and you're switching between them, it's not going to have to reload every single time you switch tasks quite as much with more RAM. But Apple's very good with optimizing tasks with less RAM, and 4 gigabytes of RAM on the iPhone 13 is probably going to be more than sufficient for you, and I wouldn't recommend going for the 14 just because of those extra 2 gigs of RAM. It is nice to see though. The iPhone 14 also features a more repairable design with a removable back glass piece, which will make repairing the back glass cheaper. And actually something the iPhone 13 has over the iPhone 14 in the United States specifically is the fact that the iPhone 13 still has a physical SIM card slot, where the iPhone 14 and newer have fully transitioned to eSIM, again in the United States specifically. So if you're in the US and you still use physical SIM cards, that's another reason to go for the 13 instead of the 14. But in terms of differences, that's pretty much it. And when you add up all those changes, it's really nothing substantial. So the iPhone 14 is a weird device in Apple's lineup right now, as it's so similar to the previous generation iPhone 13 that Apple is still selling, that if you're considering buying the iPhone 14, it just makes more sense to buy the iPhone 13 instead and save yourself $100. The iPhone 14 starts at $699 and the iPhone 13 starts at $599. Now, something else you should definitely consider if you were prepared to buy the iPhone 14 for $699 is the fact that the latest iPhone 15 is only $100 more than the iPhone 14, starting at $799. And the iPhone 15 actually features some noteworthy improvements, like a noticeably better camera, the dynamic island cutout at the top of the screen, a tweaked design, USB-C instead of Lightning, and a brighter display that's able to go all the way up to 1000 nits brightness. So the jump from the iPhone 13 to the 14 is just so small in comparison to the jump from the 14 to the 15, making the iPhone 13 more appealing than ever right now, and the 14 less appealing, as it's kind of this weird in-between device that is not that much better than the 13. So it just makes more sense to either go for the iPhone 13 or the iPhone 15 right now. But alright, time to knock out some work for the next couple hours here. And throughout this time at the coffee shop, I used the phone periodically, scrolling around Instagram and Twitter for around an accumulated 30 minutes. But for the majority of this time, the phone was just asleep. And quick battery check before we head out of here and over to the gym. We're still sitting pretty high at 86%. Alright, so we're going to do our typical 1 hour of music streaming to Bluetooth headphones test using Spotify over cellular data while I work out here. And starting off, we're sitting at 83%. And checking in after an hour of music streaming, we're sitting at 78%. So we dropped 5% in an hour of streaming music to Bluetooth headphones, which is not bad at all.
Alright, gonna take a shower real quick, and then I got a few more hours of work that I want to knock out tonight.
And throughout the next few hours of me working, I use the phone for around 20 minutes to browse social media and a little bit of email.
Alright guys, next up we're going to do a 20-minute FaceTime call with the iPhone 14 to see how much battery consumption occurs. We're just going to use another iPhone that I have here, let it run for 20 minutes, and then check in on the battery performance after. Going into it, we're at 72%. And checking in after 20 minutes, we're currently sitting at 64%. So we dropped 8% throughout that 20-minute FaceTime call, which is about to be expected. I mean, FaceTime calls are notoriously one of the most battery taxing tasks on iPhones. I certainly remember with a lot of the older iPhones, a lot more battery loss would have occurred in this time.
And as I often do, I finished the day with around 35 minutes of YouTube video streaming to my AirPods.
So in conclusion, the iPhone 14 is a fantastic iPhone. But because the iPhone 13 is $100 cheaper and offers almost the exact same experience, if you're planning on buying an iPhone 14 right now, I would recommend going for the 13 instead. The iPhone 14 starts at $699 and the iPhone 13 starts at $599. All you're really missing out on by going for the 13 instead of the 14 is just minor tweaks and changes here and there. Nothing worth spending that extra $100 in my opinion. Now, it's also important to realize that if you were prepared to spend $699 for the iPhone 14, the iPhone 15, which actually brings some solid noteworthy improvements to the table, starts at just $100 more than the iPhone 14, The iPhone 15 starting at $799. So that's also another way to go. The iPhone 14 is a weird device right now in Apple's lineup because Apple's still selling the 13 for $100 less, and of course they're selling the 15 for $100 more. And with the 13 and the 14 being so similar, it either makes sense to go for the 13 for cheaper or go all the way up to the 15. But of course, if you already own an iPhone 14, again, it's a fantastic device. It's just if you're about to buy right now, I would go for the 13 instead. And at the end of the day here, my battery is sitting at 59%, which is quite good. It definitely wasn't a very heavy usage day, but I can confidently say that this device would have no issues getting me through any average day. Of course, if I use the phone more than I did today, which definitely happens, I might end the day with maybe 30% or 25%, but very solid battery performance. The iPhone 14 and iPhone 13 are both known for having very solid battery performance. Obviously, so long as the condition of the battery in your device is decent. This iPhone that I'm using in this video is a device that I have dedicated for video, so it does have a 100% battery health capacity. And of course, when you buy a new iPhone, it will have a 100% battery health capacity. And in terms of what used the most percentage, you can see here Instagram and that FaceTime call, Spotify, Maps from the GPS, and Twitter were the highest battery taxing tasks. And guys, that just about wraps it up for this video. If you're an iPhone 14 user or an iPhone 13 user, let me know down below in the comments section your thoughts on the device. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and of course, as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.